Welcome to another video from McFatter Tech Musser. If you like these videos, please click subscribe.
Recording. This is a special team session. Think of it as a Saturday server boot camp. It's here. We're answering questions. Kevin's joined me this morning. We're going to run through how we set up our network. A couple changes. As you can see on my screen, I've got Teams up, and if you take a look in your Teams under Files, you'll notice that the Hyper-V networking and Windows Server MOAC 70-740, 70-741, and 70-742, that document, that's our roadmap for the last 3 sections of your course. This tells us all about how we're going to set up everything. It's got a lot of important instructions that I put this together for you. If we were in the classroom, it would be a handout. I would list all pages of this, all 62 pages of this is printed as a booklet for you. We're not there. So here's the virtual document, the online document. It's indexed so you can click and go to the particular page, but it walks you through all the different ways to create Hyper-V virtual machines, installing that Hyper-V role if you're working with that, setting up network address translation, NAT, setting up our domain controller. We need to create a shared software folder. The instructions are there. Also, there's some important instructions for some components that we need to download. We're going to look at that. We're going to walk through that today. So those instructions will be there both in the booklet as well as in this video. Of course, then setting up additional, if we were in the classroom, we'd be walking through all this because we'd be installing the Windows Server virtual machines, would be adding the virtual interfaces and all that. We're working with ACE-IT right now because of the COVID-19 distancing. So that's been created for you, but understand the process needed. It's important to understand now there's going to be entire lessons on Hyper-V. So you're going to get an in-depth understanding about how Hyper-V works from the perspective of watching my videos. I can't give you the hands-on experience. Now, you can, if you're running Windows 10, not Home Edition, you could install Hyper-V. Understand, though, you need to have the disk space. It needs to be a pretty fast disk. Solid states are best. And you need to have enough memory. I would say if you're going to run virtual machines, you need to have a minimum of 8 gigabytes, 16's better of RAM. But since we're not in the classroom environment, we're not really focused on that. But understand those things that you could create your own environment, and then you could run Hyper-V just like I do here and create many, many virtual machines and use them for whatever I need to use them for. Test labs, to be able to play around with this stuff. But that's why we've got the ACE-IT, right? All the different settings. When we go into our next textbook, the 70-741, we're going to be redoing our setup. So we're going to be creating a new environment in ACE-IT because initially we had our Server 2016 lab. Well, we're going to be removing that. We're going to remove that because Broward College, who has generously provided this resource to us, has upgraded their service, upgraded their storage. So we're now working with Server 2019. 99% the same, but it lets us work with the most current version. So we're going to be looking at this morning, we're going to look at how do we delete that current lab and then move to the new lab. Students are going to have access to both labs initially. Once you've removed that lab and you let me know, then I'll remove your access to that because we're not going to be using that anymore. We'll look at the process of how we activate that lab. We're going to configure it. When we're done with it and we're ready to move in from 70-740 to 70-741, we'll look at the process of how do we deactivate that lab and reactivate it to start from scratch. If something goes wrong, if for some reason your network just is bonked, it won't work. Something is just totally wrong. You don't know what you did. You say, you know what? I'm going to start over. This is how you'll do that. We'll look at that. We'll also look at using the sconfig utility. This is a new utility that came about with Windows Server 2016. Didn't exist prior to that. It's a textual base, so we run it from command prompt, an administrative command prompt or a PowerShell admin, and it allows us to do manual setup. It's the only way that you can tell server not to download updates. That's important because if we're working in this virtual environment, if our domain controller is connected to the internet for us to be able to download files that we need for our lab environment, we don't want to get in Windows Update. We'll look at that. I'm going to show you how to turn that off. So make sure you get a copy of this document. It's in your Teams. If you don't already have a copy of it, download it. If you already have a copy of it, understand that here, this on page 19, I did update the document. So this is the latest version. If you've got a current version, get rid of it and download this new version. Our copy of it on D2L has also been updated. So you can get it from Teams, you can get it from D2L. It's there, get it. So that's in Teams. So here again, you can see it right here. I've got it open in D2L. Here's that change that I was talking about, steps 9 and 10. We're going to be doing that here in just a few moments. But the next thing we want to do, let's jump over to ACE-IT. So once I make the change, once I add you to that second class, that second lab, this is what you're going to see. You're going to be able to have two labs that are active. Currently, I've got the 70-740/70-742. Well, I don't need that anymore. I need to deactivate it. And you can see that I'm gonna bring up the magnifier just to maybe make it a little bit easier to see some of this stuff. So if you look here in the upper right, here's deactivate. So I'm gonna deactivate this lab because I'm no longer gonna use it. So I'm gonna click deactivate. We're gonna see, you can see the little swirly going around up on the browser tab. The background is going to change to dark green. That tells me that it's no longer active. There it is. Now, I don't need this lab anymore. I'm going to go up to the upper right and I'm going to select delete. This was grayed out before. So I'm going to click delete. And now that lab is gone. If for some reason I want to work in it, I could select it again and copy to my labs, but I don't. Here's my Server 2019 lab. I've already activated that. I've already configured mine. You know what? Let's take a look. It's going to load. You're going to see the nice light green background. You know what? It's gone. I'm going to deactivate. This was fully configured. All 4 servers were fully configured. I'm wiping out my work. Now I can select activate. But let's say this is my first time in the course. I log in and maybe I'd only see my email address. You know what? I'm going to add my name. And I'm going to save. If your name does not appear in the upper right, right here, I would want you to do that. Click on your email address, what would be your email address shown, and add your first and last name and then save. This way, when you're performing your labs and you take your screenshot of the entire window, your entire monitor, I can see your name. I know that it's your work. If I don't know it's your work, I can't give you credit for it. Very important. I may have already done this for many of my students, but double check. So now I click back to lab. Now I need to add my lab. So I'm going to look under published labs. What labs are available for me to copy to my labs? Well, here's my Server 2019 lab. I'm going to select that. I'm going to click copy to my labs. And there it appears. But I'm not ready to work with it. Notice the background's dark green. If you see that dark green background, it means you can't use it. It's not activated yet. It's added, but it's not active. So what I need to do is go to the upper left and click Activate. Now we're going to see that browser tab. It's scrolling around again. It's loading. It's making this lab active for me. Should just take a few more moments. There it is. Now you'll notice now my on button, my console buttons, these are all green and they're active. I can click on them. So let's get started. I'm going to click on for DC1. Remember, when we're working in a domain, a server, a Windows network, our domain controller is the heart of that network. It provides the ability for our users and computers to authenticate to the network, provide authentication, and get authorization for what they can do. Two important concepts: authentication and authorization. When you log into, for example, Ace IT, you provide your username, which is your email address, and a password. You are authenticating to that system. You have a certain set of labs that are available to you. That is your authorization. What can I do? Where can I go? Important concepts to understand with how we control networking, because we don't want to create our user accounts and give them administrative access. Perhaps if you're an administrator, of course, you'd need administrative access, but if you're a standard user, you shouldn't be able to log into a server. You shouldn't be able to access a network switch or a router or a firewall. These are restricted components only for those individuals in your organization that have elevated permissions. Now, our DC should be setting itself up. I'm going to click on the console button. We can see it's loading. Now, if we were doing this in the classroom environment, we would have inserted an ISO, a downloaded eval ISO. That's a disk image file from Microsoft. Or we could have, if you're doing this in a real environment, you may have a disk to install, a DVD, and you would run the installation process from that. We run through that. For now, understand that this is already pre-configured for us. All we need to do is tell it to turn on, and it's going to set itself up. All our images, doesn't matter whether we're working in Windows Server, Windows 10, Kali Linux, whatever, they all use the password capital PA11WORD. That is how we access our virtual machines. We can see just in a few minutes that I was talking, this copy of server is set up. We're ready to log in. How do we log in? Right on the very top of the screen, notice the Control-Alt-Delete button. Understand that if I press Control-Alt-Delete on my keyboard, you'll notice that on the screen, it says press Control-Alt-Delete to unlock. Unlike your desktop operating system, servers are secured. you need to do a certain key combination to be able to log in. However, if I press Control-Alt-Delete on my keyboard, it's going to try to lock my keyboard. If I do that, you may not see this, but yeah, I've got an option to lock, switch user, sign out, change password. It didn't let me log into my server. So they needed a way to emulate the same key combination, and that's what that button does. So I'm going to click Control-Alt-Delete up at the top. It's the same as if I was doing it on my keyboard with a physical machine. So there, I'm ready to log in. Now you'll notice there's a difference between the server 2016s that we were working with and this server 2019. It's much higher resolution, and that's going to be a problem for us because of the way that it looks at the graphics, at the way that it looks at the text. I'm going to show you how to fix that. So I put in my capital PA11WORD, press enter. I don't know if it looks that way to you, but the text looks just kind of grainy. That's the best it's going to look. Now, see that? Look at that. Doesn't look real clear. It's hard to read that text. It gets real small. We need to change the screen resolution to make everything much larger. And luckily, that's real easy to do. All I got to do is click on an open part of my desktop. And then I right click, that is, and then I'm going to left click on display settings. It brings up our settings, and here again, look how difficult it is to read this. This is not easy to read. We need to be able to see what we're doing, right? So I'm going to click the down arrow under screen resolution. See that right there? Let me zoom in on that. Right here, see resolution? And it's hard to read, but down here, 1280 by 800. That's what you're going to select, 1280 by 800. Now, I'm going to keep those changes. I'm going to zoom back out. Look how much nicer that looks. Granted, everything's much larger. You can't pack so much stuff in anymore, but we can see what we're doing. Each and every one of these servers that you set up, that's the first thing you're going to do. You're going to right click on the desktop, you're going to left click on that display settings, and you're going to go and you're going to change the resolution to 1280 by 800. Now, when that prompt comes up, you have to say that you want to keep that. In fact, let's go ahead. I'm going to change this. See that keep changes? You need to click that keep changes. Now, I've already set it, so I'm going to tell it to revert. There, I'm back to my 1280 by 800. Write that down. Remember that, 1280 by 800. Now, we work in Server Manager. You can leave Server Manager up the entire time. Don't close Server Manager. Even when you shut down the computer, leave it run. It's the first thing it loads when we turn our servers on. You can leave it there. It's how we manage our server. The first time you log in, it doesn't matter whether it's a local server, whether it's a domain controller or whatever, you're going to see this Welcome to Server Manager. Now you can click on the links in here, but you know what? That just clutters up the screen. I'm going to click Hide. Now that's my personal preference. If you want to leave that there, that's fine. The first thing that we need to do, just like where we live, the mailman, or if a friend comes over, they need to know what your address is. They need to know that if they're going to deliver your mail, or if Amazon, for example, is delivering a package, they need to know exactly who you are and what your address is. Well, that's the same thing we have to do with our servers. Servers always need to be reachable at the exact same place. The analogy I give is, what if every weekend you went to go shopping at Publix and the store had a different name on it? This week it's a different name. You know, you pull in to Publix and it says Whole Foods. Wait a minute. What happened to my Publix? Or even worse, it moved. The address changed. It's down the street somewhere, or maybe even on a different street. How do you find it? Well, It's the same thing we need to think about with server. We need to name it, give it a name that's easily recognizable, and we also need to give it an IP address, a static IP address. Now you'll notice that this has two Ethernet adapters. I need to make sure that I'm going to pick the correct one. So what I'm going to do, first thing, I'm going to go back to lab up here in the upper left corner. I'm going to click back to lab. That's going to let me look at the properties for my servers. See this config bar or config button I can click on? If I do that, it zooms in and tells me a little bit more about this. I can see that my London network, we're going to name all these different servers Lund-something. Well, that's short for London. It's our London network. I can see that the MAC address, the machine address for that network adapter ends with 6B. Remember that, 6B. I'm going to zoom back out. I'm going to go back to the console. That's how I get back to my server. I'm going to click on either one of these network adapters. Right there in the middle of the screen. Pops up. I'm going to right click on that first one. I'm going to go to status, and then I'm going to click on details. There it is, 6B. I know that that's my London network. That's the one I'm going to give a static IP address to. This adapter is connected to the public internet. If I look at status, I can see that it's been given an IP address that allows it to browse the internet. That's going to be important because we're going to have to download some files. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rename, I'm going to right click on that adapter. I'm going to rename this public. I'm going to right click on Ethernet and say properties, left click on properties, and I'm going to double click on IPv4 and I'm going to go to sign a static. Use the following address, 172.16.0.10. You'll note, and that's the same thing that's in those instructions that I gave you. This is going to be the address for our domain controller. I can hit my tab button one time and it says, hey, I recognize that as being a Class B address. I'm going to leave that be just the way it is. Wants to know, hey, what's our domain? What's our DNS server? Well, we're going to be a domain controller. This is going to be our domain controller. It's going to host our DNS. So if I want to find something, who do I talk to? I talk to myself because I'm the domain controller. The DC1 or Lund-DC1, that's going to be its name. It's going to have DNS. So if I want to find one of my other systems, I need to talk to myself. So how do I talk to myself? I go to the local loopback. Remember that from our networking? If you want to check if your network adapter is working, you ping the local host or you ping the loopback address of 127.0.0.1. That's what I'm going to type in here, 127.0.0.1. Talk to myself to resolve DNS names. I'm going to click OK. I'm going to close network connections and I'm going to go up here to the top to that little circle with the two arrows and I'm going to refresh. There. I've got my IP address statically assigned. That's going to be the heart of my network. I've got my public interface, but you know what? I want to make sure that this doesn't interfere with our network right now because we're going to create this as a domain controller. Temporarily, I'm going to right click on public and I'm going to tell it to disable. At any time, we can go back in and re-enable that. But that way it doesn't interfere with our network setup. Before we can create our network, we need to give it a name, right? So I'm going to click on this name, this CSIT Bro. It's the Computer Science IT Department at Broward College. I'm going to click Change. Here I'm going to type in my name, Lund DC1 and click OK. It's going to take a few moments. It says, hey, you've changed the name. You need to restart this computer before you can do any more. So I'm going to click OK. And then I'm going to click Close. When I click Close, it's going to say, hey, changes are pending. Would you like to restart now or later? I think we'll restart now. It's going to take a few moments for this system to shut down and restart. Won't take very long though. That's the beauty of working in this virtual environment. If we had a slow hard drive and we were trying to do this ourselves, I can tell you right now, if we were in the classroom, it's not going to restart this quickly because we've got regular hard drives that we're doing these virtual machines on. Look at that. It's already up and ready to log it back in. Let me take a sip of coffee. All right. Got to have that coffee. Okay, so how do we log in? We press that Control-Alt-Delete button in the very top. Now we can see, remember the first time we logged into this, that text was real small, it was hard to read. Well, there we are. We're ready to log in. So I'm going to type in my password, capital PA11WORD, enter. And here we are. It's going to take just a few moments. There it is. There it is. There, we're up. Server Manager is going to load automatically. Server Manager will start each and every time. Depending on the age of your system, depending on the roles that it's hosting, maybe some setup that it's doing while it starts up, maybe Server Manager takes a few moments to actually appear on the screen. That's normal. If you look at the top, notice there's a blue bar that's going across underneath Server Manager Desktop. That means Server Manager is loading. Until Server Manager is fully loaded, we can't select add roles and features. We might be able to select it, but it's going to tell you, hey, we're still loading. You can't access this now. Now you'll notice there's 5 services that have a red flag. They're in the red. These are services that don't have to start immediately when you start the computer. They are, you'll notice the start type says automatic delayed start. When you start a server or start even your Windows 10 machine, there are services that are critical for the operation of that system. They are automatically started. Ones that are important but not critical to the start are flagged as automatic delayed start. Within a few moments, maybe a minute or two, they will start. So you don't have to worry about those. That'll go away. If we come back over here to our left column and I click on local server, again, we can see we've set the name of the computer. We've assigned an IP address. Remember I talked about that sconfig utility? Well, we need to get in there and tell it to turn off Windows Update. You'll notice it says download updates. Download updates only. It's not going to install them, but it's going to download them. Let's stop that. I'm going to go down to my start button. I'm going to right click on my start button and I'm going to go to Windows PowerShell Admin. There's our admin prompt. We should have a flashing prompt. There it is. You'll notice to the left it says PS. That's how we know it's in PowerShell. I'm going to type in sconfig and press enter. It switches the screen. See that? Look under option number 5. Windows Update Setting Download Only. Well, I'm going to change that. I'm going to select number 5. You got to do this with your keyboard, no mouse. I press enter. It says, hey, do you want to automatically get those updates? Do you want to just download them? Or do you want to flag it for manual? I'm going to select M for manual and press enter. It's going to take a few moments. It's running a little script. We're going to get a prompt saying that it was successful. Should be here in just a second. There it is. Windows Update set to manual. The system will never check for updates. Doesn't mean we can't manually do it, right? Because we set it to manual. But we don't want to slow the system down. We're working in a test environment. This is our test lab. This is our sandbox to play in. We don't need it slowed down, telling us that, hey, there's updates to install, and then you got to sit there and, come on. You know, we're not doing that. Now, I'm still in my server configuration. If you'll notice, option number 15 is exit to command line. I'm going to do that. 15, I type 15 and I press enter. I'm back to my PowerShell command prompt. I type exit and press enter. PowerShell is done. Okay, so we're not going to get updates on this. Now we're ready to turn this into a domain controller. We've set our static IP address and we've named it. How do we make this a domain controller? We're going to go to Manage, Add Roles and Features. Manage is how we manage the server. Tools is how we make changes to those roles or features that we've added to it. We can view and modify our services, the system configuration, disk cleanup. Tools are the things that we use, right? Think of a carpenter. They've got a tool belt that they carry their hammer and their nails and their ruler and all those things. Well, this is our tool belt. We're going to click Manage, Add Roles and Features. When this wizard begins, I'm going to tell you right now, you're going to click Next 3 times. Yeah, every time. We're going to click Next 3 times. 1, everything that we do is role-based or feature-based. That's why we can just click through this. Next, we're only going to be managing our DC1, but understand Windows Server gives you the ability to manage other servers without ever having to be in front of them. You can remotely manage your servers from this server or from a Windows desktop with the administrative tools installed. Literally, I can manage servers around the world from one place. I can install roles, I can install features, I can configure them, I can remove roles without ever having to touch that server physically. Makes your life simple. We're going to click Next. That's our 3rd click. We want to create a domain. A Windows domain, Windows networking. I'm going to select Active Directory Domain Services. It's very important that you select Add Features. This adds those tools, those consoles that we use to be able to manage Active Directory. Got to have those features. We add. We click Next. We're not going to add any additional features right now. We're going to click Next. Gives us a little information about the Active Directory domain services, what we need, what we're going to be doing. We click Next. We're ready to install. This won't turn it into a domain controller, but this installs the functionality. Once we're done, then we'll start setting up our domain. So let's go ahead and click Install. While that installs, let's do some other things, because we're going to have other computers that we need to be able to manage. Instead of going back to the lab, I'm just going to click Lun Server 1 right here. It's grayed out. No connection to it. I'm going to tell it to power on. I'm going to do the same thing to Lun Server 2. I'm going to power on. And yeah, you guessed it, Lun SVR3, I'm going to tell it to power on. So these 3 member servers, remember, we've got a domain controller. It's the heart of our network. Member servers provide services. All of our servers provide services. Understand that users don't typically ever log onto a service or server. They access the services, the roles that they provide. DHCP, DNS, a file resource, a database, whatever it may be. These servers provide the services, your network services. So we can see that server 1, server 2, and server 3, they're beginning to set themselves up. We're going to let them go. Let's go back over to DC1. You notice I'm just clicking between the buttons and it's just swapping from one to another to another. Very easy for management. I love this. I love this interface that they've given us. So it's going to take a few more moments and we're going to install that. On that LUN server 1, server 2, and server 3, we're going to set the static IP address for each one of those. But we're going to wait. I want to wait until this is fully configured, because we're going to create our domain. We're going to set up DNS. I'm also going to configure DHCP. And finally, we're going to install our certificate authority, our certification authority. That's going to be very important. This is all the steps that we need to be able to create our network. Then on my other servers, DHCP can give them an address and allow them to communicate on our network. I'm still going to set a static IP address. But then, once your domain's created, remember the DC, I simply named it and now I'm creating a domain. Well, when we join a member server or a desktop computer to a domain, you can set the name and join it to the domain at the same time. 2 steps in one. We didn't used to be able to do that. Years ago in server, you could not do that prior to Windows Server 2012. We're progressing along. Let's take a look over here on server 1. Still getting ready. Server 2, getting ready. Server 3, getting ready. So not impacting the performance of our system whatsoever. This is all on their servers. That's the other benefit of this. Our computer hasn't slowed down because we're loading up 4 servers. Back to DC1. Should be done here very shortly. So, Kevin, how are you making out today? Were you able to get that lab completed that we talked about? I haven't even checked Dropbox in D2L. Remember that it's important that we perform our labs the same day that we're doing our lessons. You don't want to wait until exam day. Yes, that's correct, lab 2. You don't want to wait until exam day to try to get these things done. It'd be kind of like having to drive to 10 different stores within 2 hours. It's near impossible, because on your exam day, that's when those labs are due by. If they're late, you're getting penalized. Thank you very much. On exam day, your job is to review each one of the chapters that we talked about, do the practice exams in D2L, and take the exam. If you've got to be devoting your time to catching up on labs, I guarantee you, you're not going to have the success on your exam that you should. And remember, when we're doing your grading, those labs have as much weight into your grade as the exams do. So if you don't do your labs, it's going to be near impossible to succeed in this course. You're going to struggle to get a passing grade. You could get 100s on every exam, but if you don't do your labs, you're not going to like your grade. Got to do the labs, because we're teaching you how to do these things. Anybody can memorize questions. Understanding the skills that are necessary to manage server is what gets you the job. That, and make sure that you're working on getting that Network Plus certification if you've not already obtained it. Now, our installation's done. You'll notice that it says feature installation configuration required. Right here in the middle of our screen, we can see promote this server to a domain controller. That's what we're going to do. This is our first server in our first domain in our first forest. Think of a domain as being a tree, and it's got many leaves and branches, the network infrastructure and all the devices that are connected to it. You can have many of those domains, and we think of those, each one of those as a tree in a forest, a domain forest. And you'll notice, well, we don't have We're not going to add a domain controller. We don't have an existing domain. We don't have an existing forest. We're going to create a new forest, add a new forest. That's what we select this first time. And we have to give it a domain name. Our domain name is one of Microsoft's test domains. It's adatum.com. adatum.com. Type that in and press enter. It's going to do a couple checks, make sure that that domain name's not already in use. And we can see that we've got some information here, domain controller options. By default, it's going to be a global catalog. It has to be, it's our first one. You'll learn about global catalog later on. We're also going to install, you'll notice when we added those roles and features, all we did was check one thing. It's also going to add DNS. DNS is critical for the operation of Active Directory. That's how our domain controller manages all these things. We're going to use that same PA11 password for the directory services restore mode. That's a special command version to be able to remember how if you restart your computer, you have an option, maybe you can go into safe mode and such. Well, this is the safe mode for our domain controller to try to restore operations in case something goes wrong. We have to give it a password and confirm that password. In a production server, you probably wouldn't use the same password as what you use to log on with. We see some DNS options. It says, hey, create DNS configuration delegation, and they can't be created because there's no, well, this is our first server. That's why we get that warning. We click next. We're going to look at some additional options, what's called a net BIOS name. It's a short name. It's going to be just a datum. And you'll see it's all capitalized. This is going back into the net BIOS days. This is old technology, but it still works. We can change that name if we wanted to. We're going to leave it just the way it is and click next. Now it says paths. Here again, if this was a production server, remember Active Directory is a database, lightweight directory access protocol. Remember learning about that? We're going to be reading and writing to a database. If this was a production server, I would probably move these folders to a separate hard drive. We're in a virtual environment, so we're going to leave it alone. Just keep that in the back of your head, maybe for in the future sometime. We click next. We can review all the options that we've selected. We're going to click next. Now it's running through, it's making sure everything's going to work just the way that it should. It's going to verify our prerequisites. We're going to see a number of warnings. That's normal. See, these are all normal. If we scroll down though, we should see prerequisite check completed, and we should get a green checkbox, all prerequisite checks passed successfully. If you've got that, we click install. Now it's going to create all the infrastructure. It's going to set up that DNS server. It's going to create the directory partitions. It's going to create all the objects and all the security parameters. We can see the DNS installation. It's waiting for it to finish. You'll be able to see all those prompts as it's happening. And you'll see it's creating many objects. This is going to take a minute or two. While that's working, let's go over here to server 1. And I'm going to log in. Let this log in for the first time. Notice that resolution, it's much smaller. Going to do the same thing on server 2. Press the Control-Alt-Delete button. And of course, SVR3 as well. Press the Control-Alt-Delete button. And we put our password in. And go back to SVR1. Because remember, we want to change that screen resolution. There we are. I'm going to right click and go to display settings. Kind of hard to view, right? It's possible to read that text the way it is. I'm going to select my resolution, and I'm going to select 1280 by 800 and keep changes. Can close that. I'm going to select SVR2. Do the same thing. Right click the desktop, left click display settings. Under resolution, select 1280 by 800. Keep changes. Close settings. Go to SVR3. Do the same thing. Right click, left click the display settings. When settings comes up, we select resolution, and the drop box, we select 1280 by 800 and keep changes. We'll let those continue to load. I'm going to go back over to the Lund-DC1. I mean, it's real nice just to be able to click back and forth between these. It's just the same as if we had a KVM. Who remembers reading about a KVM? Keyboard, video, mouse. It's a switch that allows you to control many systems from one set of a monitor, keyboard, and a mouse. We use these all the time on server racks so that you've got one monitor, one keyboard, and one mouse, and you can just swap from one system to another. So you could have many servers in that rack, but you only have to have the one keyboard, mouse, and monitor. So our DC1, it finished its configuration and it automatically restarted. That is normal, because now when it logs back on, we're going to be a domain controller. So it's going through all the setting changes. It's created those things. Now we need to see applying domain policy. There was no domain policy before. We're going to click that Control-Alt-Delete button again. This time when we log in, we're not just going to log in as administrator. We're logging in as a datum administrator, the domain administrator. Now also, this is important. Understand that this is the first domain controller. In our first domain, in that first forest, this domain administrator account, which was originally our local server administrator account, it's not just the domain administrator, it's also the enterprise administrator. The domain administrator, he carries the keys to the castle. The domain administrator has a set of keys for the entire kingdom. Make sure that if you're in a production network, this account, this enterprise, any enterprise administrator account is secured with a strong and long password. Complexity defeats the human hacker. Length defeats the computer. We're going to use that same password to log in. Very important. Complexity defeats the human hacker. Length defeats the computer. Not going to get into all the intricacies of that. That's for our applied cybersecurity course. If you're interested in that, once you're done with your studies in network support services, keep in mind, network support services, this is to give you the foundation to be able to go out and get that first job in IT. Get that network certification, the CompTIA Network Plus. It tells employers that you understand how to manage not only their network, but their PCs. Go through all these things. It's going to take a few moments for it to come up. And we're going to see, remember there was only 3 of these boxes before, we're going to see more now. This is the first time we've logged in as the domain administrator. And what I was there we are. What I was saying was, at the end of the Network Support Services program, you should have your Network Plus. In fact, I encourage you, we're doing this recording on the Saturday before Thanksgiving week. This is a perfect time. This week coming up is a perfect time for you to be able to hone those skills for the Network Plus. We've got winter break coming up. Ideal time for you to get that Network Plus certification. Make sure you're doing all your practice. Use Test Out. Make sure you understand all those questions. If you understand, if you can score high on all those practice exams in Test Out, you are set up to obtain the Network Plus. Employers look for it. This gives you a foot in the door. Get that first network job, that first IT job. If you want to enhance your knowledge, I encourage you to come back in to our applied cybersecurity program. That's going to give you the knowledge to advance. Everything nowadays, in one way or another, is tied to cybersecurity. It's just a fact of life. Consider it for the future. Now, we can see we've got one service that hasn't started yet. If we take a look, here again, see, automatic delayed start. We're not going to worry about that. But we can see we now have the AD, the Active Directory Domain Services. We've got DNS. We need to finish our setup on DNS. Before I do that, I'm going to click Manage. I'm going to add DHCP to this computer, to this server, to this domain controller. I'm going to click Next. Here again, role-based, Next. Managing this server, Next. Remember those three, Next, 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 Next. I'm going to check DHCP. This will give us the ability to automatically hand out addresses. Normally, you would put this on a different server. We're only working with a small environment, so we have to consolidate some of our roles. Normally, you would not do this. Next, 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 install. While that's installing, this is a server. It can multitask. It can do many things. I'm going to go and finish our DNS setup. What do we need to do? Well, our DNS is running, and it provides our forward lookup zones. You're going to learn a lot more about DNS as this course progresses. If I select my server and then expand it, click what we call caret, that's that little arrow on the side, I can see I've got forward lookup zones. This is the Active Directory partition. Here's our forward lookup zone for our host machines, our host records. Forward lookup zone provides a link between the name and the IP address that it's associated with. But you also want to have what's called a reverse lookup to be able to look up a name from an address. Just the same way as, think of it as a phone book. You go to the phone book, you look up a name to find the address for them. Well, a reverse lookup would say, hey, here's a number, a phone number. Whose phone number is that? That's what we're going to do. We're going to select network, a reverse lookup zone. We're going to right click on it and say New Zone. On our little wizard welcome screen, we click Next. We are going to create a primary zone. I'm going to roll through this. Understand, you're going to learn more about this in our DNS lessons. It will be a primary zone. It's going to be to any server running on our domain, any domain controller. It will be an IPv4 reverse lookup zone. Now it says, hey, what's the network ID? Remember when we created that one, when we assigned that 172.16.0.10 address to our domain controller, it said, hey, I recognize that as a Class B address. And a Class B address, remember we talked about this, A, B, C, Class A, Class B, Class C, A, B, C, 1, 2, 3. A Class A fills the first octet of an IPv4. A Class B fills the first 2 octets, and a Class C fills the first 3 octets. So what's our network ID? The first 2 octets. That is 172.16. That's what identifies the network that we're on. I can simply click next. We're only going to allow secure dynamic updates from our Active Directory. We click next and we click finish. There's our reverse lookup zone. Every zone is always going to have an NS and SOA, a name server record and a start of authority record. Important to remember that for a quiz question one day. If I click on my datum.com forward lookup zone, there's my DC1. I'm going to double click on that record and I'm going to put a check mark beside update associated pointer record. And I'm going to click OK. And I'm going to go back to my reverse lookup zone and I'm going to refresh it. And there is my pointer, the address to the name. An A record is an IPv4 record associating a name to an address. A quad A, that's AAAA, is an IPv6 record for a name to an IPv6 address. We're done with DNS for now. I can close that. I can see that my DHCP has finished, but I need to run the complete DHCP configuration wizard, the post-install wizard. I'm going to click on that. It's a very simple wizard. It says, hey, it's going to perform the following steps. It's going to create 2 security groups, and it's going to authorize the server. We click next. We're going to use our domain credentials. We click commit. And there it did. It created the groups. It authorized the server. We can click close, and we can click close on our add roles and features wizard. We've installed DHCP. We've authorized DHCP, but now we want to configure it. So I'm going to go back up to tools. Remember, we getting our tool belt out. I'm going to go to DHCP. We need to create a scope. You'll learn about this. I'm just going to roll through this. Just understand these are the steps, the same steps that are in your worksheet that I gave you. The worksheet that's in D2L, that's in your teams that we looked at. I expand everything out. I'm going to right click on IPv4 and I'm going to say new scope. I'm going to click next on our wizard screen. I'm just going to call it a datum and press enter. It says, hey, what's the starting IP address? If you'll remember from your instructions, it's 172.16.0.160. And the ending IP address, excuse me, is 172.16.0.190. That'll be the IPs that are available to hand out. And you can see it understands that's a Class B range, right? We click next. We're not going to do any exclusions or delays at this time. We click next. We're going to allow the default lease duration. Do we want to configure options? Yes. It says, hey, is there a router? If we were on a regular network, we would put one in. We're not going to put one in at this point. It already sees our domain and our domain controller. That's why I disabled that public interface. We click next. Don't worry about wins servers. We want to activate it. Yes, we do. We click next and finish. Our DHCP is set up. There's our address pool we can see. We can see our scope options. Everything looks good. I'm going to close that. Now it's time to join our computers. We're an hour into our network. We've got a fully functional network. We still have to do our certification authority, but we'll do those steps as soon as we get our other servers joined. Won't let me log into the 2019 server. Are you able to log into ACE-IT, Kevin? And you're using, to check your caps lock. In fact, here's a great thing. I'm going to bring this over onto my screen. I'm going to make you a presenter. and I'm going to allow you to share your screen. So if you can, please share your screen. Just to save on some bandwidth, I'm going to turn my video cam, my webcam off. Okay, so there you are. If you would minimize Teams on your screen there. Okay, now, okay, you're done with, okay, first off, you're done with that lab 2. So I want you to click on that first 70-740, 70-742. And we're going to show everyone else how to deactivate a lab. You go to the upper left, click deactivate. We're going to wait for that screen to refresh and go dark green. And then you're going to go to the upper right above lab resources and click on the delete button. Now, select the other 70-740, 70-742 and do the same thing. Okay, now click on your Server 2019 lab. And click Activate. Remember, we have to activate the lab before we can use the lab. That's what you need to do. Easy mistake. Everybody makes it. I've done the same thing. Now go ahead and click on for DC1. Click on the config button below there and record what the last 2 characters are in that MAC address for the London network. Or just write them down. You will need those later. Yep, if you're ready, go ahead and click on console. If you know what those characters are. And your servers are starting to set up. Okay, if you would cancel your screen share, I'm going to go back and then we're going to go back to mine. Yep, right there. All right. Works like a champ. I love it. I love it when things work the way they should. Now, let's go back here. Are we still recording? We are still recording, but I need to reshare my screen. All right, there we are. We're back up. Okay, so I'm going to click on LUN SVR1. It says, hey, whoa, it went away. I inadvertently clicked there, but it said the network found at datum.com. Let's click local server. And I'm going to click on this network connection. IP address assigned by DHCP. Look at that. It sees the domain. We're going to right click. We're going to left click on status and then left click on details. It got an IP address from our DHCP server. It knows our DHCP server address, our DNS address. We're going to set a static IP address on this. I'm going to click properties and then IPv4. Use the following IP address, 172.16.0.21. This is in your instructions. Make sure you follow the same IP address configuration as I am. I hit tab, it says, hey, it's class B. We also need to add, remember, we don't need to do a gateway. We can't get to the internet with these machines. We need to add a DNS server. You remember what the DNS server was? 172.16.0.10. Our DNS server, the same as our domain controller. I'm going to click OK. I'm going to click OK. I'm going to click Close and close network connections. I'm going to refresh my server manager just to make sure that, yep, there it is. If I typed everything correctly, I should be able to join this to our domain. I can click on either the name or the workgroup. Takes you to the same interface, same page. I click change. I'm going to type in lund-svr1, and I'm going to click domain and type in adatum.com. Press enter. Should take a few moments. There it is. It sees our domain. Administrator. And my password. Typed everything correctly. It should give us a welcome to the adatum.com domain. Bingo. Enter. But we're not done yet. You're going to see this error message. I don't know why it does it, but it does it. This thing joined to the domain just fine. Ignore the error message. Click OK. It says, hey, you got to restart your computer. Yep, I know. I'm going to click OK. And now I'm going to click close, and I'm going to get that same restart message we saw when we renamed our domain controller. Restart now. So it's going to restart. I guarantee you it will work. I'm going to go to Lund SVR2. We're going to do the same thing. See it there at adatum.com. I can go to local server. I'm going to select that network connection. This one's got two. The reason being is we're going to have one exercise where we're going to use both of those two. I'm going to connect. I'm going to click on one of the network, and I can see right here at datum.com. I know that that's the one that has our address on it. If I right click and go to status, I should see 172.16.0.161. Perfect. I can go to properties. I'm going to double click IPv4, use the following address. This is SVR2. It's going to be 172.16.0.22. You guessed it. Class B. What's that domain controller DNS server address? 172.16.0.10. Click OK. Click OK. Click Close. Close network connections. Refresh server manager just to make sure. I'm going to go and I'm going to click Workgroup. I'm going to click Change. I'm going to name my computer. I'm going to put in my domain name. We're going to see that same. We're going to get the prompt of who's got credentials to do this. We know our password. I press enter. Welcome to it, and I'm going to get that error message again, I bet. Yep, there I got the error message. You know what? I don't care. It says the name will remain at datum.com. Well, that's what we want. So I have no idea why that error message pops up, but it does. We got to restart. Yep, we know. We click close. We're going to restart now. It's going to restart. I'm going to jump back over to SVR1 because this should be ready for us to log in. I'm going to press that Control-Alt-Delete button at the top. Now, to log into our network, if I just type in a password, I'm going to log into the local server. You need to click Other User. Now, see, it says sign into a datum. However, this is very important. Remember, the administrator account still exists on this computer. If I simply type in administrator, watch this sign in to down here. It changes to lun-svr1. That's not what we want. Everybody makes this mistake. I can't tell you how many times I did it myself and still do it. There's instructional videos where I've done it. It happens. Back out of that, type name, a datum, /. You'll see it went from all caps to lowercase. Administrator. Oh, I misspelled administrator. And our password. Now it will log in as the domain administrator. Let's get this done over on SVR3. You can see it, datum.com, perfect. Local server. I'm going to click on my network connection. This one's only got one. I'm going to right click on it. This one I'm going to go straight to properties and double click IPv4. Use the following address. This is SVR3, so it's going to be, what do you think the address is? 23. Class B address. We put in our DNS server 172.16.0.10. Click OK. Click OK. Click close. Refresh my server manager just to make sure. Looks good. Click work group. Click change. Type in my computer name, lun-svr3. Click domain. Type in a datum.com. Press enter. I'll get my whose credentials can you use to do this? Enter. Welcome to the datum.com domain. Get my error message. Say I don't care about your error message. Yep, I know I have to restart. I click close, and I'm going to restart now. We should be able to log into SVR2. I'm going to do that same thing. Control-Alt-Delete. And then you got to click Other User. I type in a datum /administrator. Our password. Excuse me. While that logs in, let's go to SVR1. We're up. Gonna get rid of that welcome to. If I click on my local server, there's my computer name. We're in the datum.com. We're good to go. Over on SVR2, it's setting itself up. Let's look at what SVR3 is doing. It's ready to log in. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to click Other User. A datum /administrator. Password. Go back to SVR2. Get used to this, jumping back and forth. Don't wait for one thing to complete when you can be working on multiple things. Let's take a look under local server. Server name's correct. Joined to the domain. IP is correct. We're looking good. These I have to change that sconfig because remember, these aren't connected to the internet. Let's take a look at SVR3. Probably just logging in. While that's logging in, these other two are set up. I'm going to go back to my DC1. Actually, you know what? Before I do that, let's go to SVR3 because it's coming up. We're just going to make sure everything's fine here. Yep, I'm going to get rid of this configure local server. I'm going to go to local server on the left-hand tab there. This is where we can see all the properties for our system. IP address, domain name, computer name. We're looking good. So all three of our member servers have joined. Let's go back over to DC1, and I'm going to go back to Tools after we log in. I'm going to go to Tools. I'm going to go to DNS, and we're going to look in that forward-looking zone. There's all of our records. They were automatically created when we joined to the domain. What about reverse lookups? There they are. I only had to select that check mark the one time, and it remembered that for all the other records. Looks like we're working like a champ. We need to add the ability to hand out digital certificates, PKI, public key infrastructure, within our network. I'm going to click Manage, Add Roles and Features. I'm going to click Next 3 times. 1, 2, 3. I'm going to select Active Directory Certificate Services. You're going to do these exact same steps. We add our features so we can manage it. I click Next, Next, Next. I also want to put a check mark beside Certification Authority Web Enrollment. There's a whole bunch of other features that we need to add in here and tools. So I'm going to click Add Features. We click Next, Next. We can see the services and features that's going to be done. We click Next and Install. This is going to take a few minutes for all these items to install, and we can see we're doing the different services, administration tools. It's configuring a web server to be able to manage that web enrollment, all the different things that are required. So this is going to take another minute or so. So Kevin, were you able to be able to start your setup? Did DC1 allow you to log in? Or is it still setting up? Working on it now. Excellent, excellent. Off to a great start. Remember, we're blowing out these old server 2016s and we're moving to server 2019. So I hope each and every one of my students reviews this. Once we save this, I'm going to send out an email so that everybody knows about it. Of course, if you see my email and are viewing this video, you'll have known about that, right? Kind of redundant to say that. Just trying to fill in time. While that finishes its installation to get us to the point where we can configure our certification authority, I'm going to step away for a second and I'm going to grab some more coffee. I'll be right back. Okay, so I'm back. Got myself a nice fresh cup of coffee, a little bit of ice water to keep my throat nice and cool. We're still installing, so this should be done. This should be done pretty quickly here. Excellent, Kevin. Thank you. Yeah, keep typing in comments. Let me know as you're making changes so I can see you're progressing along. Okay, our certification authority installation is done, but we need to configure it. So I'm going to click this link right here. Configure Active Directory certificate services on the destination server. You're going to see that same thing in those instructions in that PDF manual that I've given you. It's in one of the appendixes. I click on that. It starts our wizard for our configuration. We're going to use our domain administrator account. We're going to click next. I'm going to put a check mark between the two role services that we have available for us to configure. We click next. Since this is part of our Active Directory and our first certification authority, we're going to select Enterprise CA, and it's our first, so it's our root CA, the root of our structure. Since we don't have any private keys that exist, we create a new one. We're going to use the 2048 and the SHA-256 hashing algorithm. This is how we're going to secure our keys with cryptography. We're going to accept our common name, distinguished name, and such. We're going to accept those records the way they are. We're going to change the validity period. We're going to make this certificate good for 10 years. Here again, we could modify this and maybe store these logs in a different place. We're not going to do that. We're in a test environment. We can see what's going to be done, our confirmation of our different settings, and we click configure. This should only take a moment or two and we'll be done. There we are. Success. We can click close and close. However, we still need to do some customization to our certificate services. Under my tools, getting that tool belt out again, now I can see I've got, you notice there's a lot more things here now. We got all the different Active Directory consoles. We got our DHCP. Well, here's Certification Authority. I'm going to click on that. It's going to load. I'm going to expand my server. I'm going to right click on certificate templates because we want to create some custom templates to be able to hand out. I'm going to click manage. It's going to open up a new window. There's my templates. I'm going to select domain controller. I'm going to right click and duplicate template. I'm going to click on the general tab and I'm going to change copy of to a datum. This is going to be a datum domain controller. I click OK. Next, I'm going to select web server. I'm going to right click on web server and select duplicate template. Again, I'm going to select general and I'm going to change it to a datum web server and click OK. I'm going to right click on that web server certificate again that I just created, the datum web server, and I'm going to go to properties. I'm going to select the security tab. With authenticated users selected, I want to make sure that read is selected for allow, write allow, and enroll allow. Make sure those three boxes are checked and click OK. At this point, we can close our templates. If I click on certificate templates again, left click this time, I'm going to right click and then say new certificate template to issue. There's our two templates that we just created. I'm going to click on the datum domain controller one time. I'm going to hold the control button on my keyboard down and also select web server. That control button allows multiple items to be selected. I'm going to release the control button and click OK. And there we can see our templates or our certificates that we can issue. I'm going to go ahead and close our certification authority. I'm going to right click my start button and I'm going to select run. We're going to create a Microsoft Management Console to manage our certificates on our server. I'm going to type MMC, Microsoft Management Console. There's no items to show. We need to add something. I'm going to go up to File, Add Remove Snap-ins, and here are all those tools. I'm going to select Certificates and click Add, and it's going to say, which set of certificates would you like to manage? I'm going to manage the computer account. I select Computer Account, click Next. Yes, it will be for this local computer. I click Finish, and I click OK. Now I can expand certificates. I'm going to expand to Personal and select Certificates. We can see that we've got a domain controller certificate, but I want to request a web certificate. I'm going to right click on certificates and go to All Tasks, Request New Certificate. I click Next. I click Next. Here are our certificates that we can request. I need to give some more information for my web server certificate. So I click on that prompt, and under this subject name, we need to change this from full DN, that's fully distinguished name. We're going to change that to common name. And I'm going to type in the full name of my computer. It's lun-dc1.adatum.com. I'm going to copy this and I'm going to click Add. We can see it's over here. I'm also going to click the General tab here, and I'm going to paste that in as the friendly name. That's important. I'm going to click OK. Now it's got all the information we need. We're going to put a check mark beside a datum web server and enroll. And there we are. If I view details, I can see that I got that certificate. In fact, I can view the certificate. We got our private key, our details, our path. Click OK, click Finish. And now I can see that I did that incorrectly. I typed it wrong. See, I typed in LUN SC1. We need to delete this and request a new certificate. Next, next, more information, change it to common name. Now I still have that pasted in. I can just change this to DC. I'm going to copy that again. Now that it's correct, I'm going to click Add. I'm going to go to General and paste in the correct friendly name, the correct common name. Select the datum web server, click Enroll, and Finish. That looks a little bit better. We scroll over, there we can see datum web server. Perfect. I can close my MMC. It asks me, do I want to save the settings? No, I don't. Go no. And we are done. Our network is completely set up. How are you making out, Kevin? Moving along with promoting that DC1 to a domain controller. Excellent, excellent. When we're working in our labs, when we're doing our labs, and I want you to take a screenshot, I want you to take a screenshot of the entire screen. It's important that you use Microsoft Word and not WordPad. There's something in WordPad, it does not like the screenshots. It doesn't want to be able to allow us to manipulate those screenshots to be viewed properly. So always use Microsoft Word and make sure that you're properly placing that screenshot. When I want a screenshot, there's a couple different ways. You can simply just press the print screen button. You can also use the snipping tool. If I click start and just start typing snip, I can see there's a snipping tool. This has been built in since Windows 7. If I click on that, it says, hey, what mode do you want? A free form? In other words, you could snip a circle, a rectangular, and you could left click and drag across a rectangle. You can do a window, which would be your browser window, or you can do full screen. I'm going to recommend that you do full screen. And now this pops up in a different editor, but you get the idea. I've got two screens. It shows me both. If I only want one, what you will have, this is what you're going to have right there. That's the view that I want to see when you take screenshots. I can see exactly what you're doing, what you're working on, and I can see your name in the upper right. Remember, we talked about that at the beginning. I need to know that it's your work, but just as importantly, if I can see what's going on your screen, and maybe you answered wrong, I might have a clue to why you got the wrong answer. I always give feedback in the grading of your labs. I don't just say question 5 was wrong. I'll say question 5 was wrong. Here's what the correct answer was, and maybe how, if I can see, maybe the reason for it. Always do that full screenshot. Okay, so, and then just so you know, here's what it looks like in the snipping tool. Like I said, this did both of my windows, but that's what it appears in the screen in the snipping tool. And you can also say, now you don't need to, you can just say copy and then paste it into your Word worksheet. If you want to save for records, you can always click File and say Save As, and you can save these screenshots for future reference. I'm not going to save this. So initially, we can get rid of that. It can go away. Initially, we were talking about running this block. Kevin, how are you making out? Do you feel like you need to stay on here, or do you feel like you're in good shape to continue on your own? Okay, so I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad you're gaining the confidence. Let's just kind of review some things here. Remember, we're going to first rename your DC1 as DC1. And then then you can add the directory services and turn it into a domain controller. You also need to make sure that you're giving it that static IP address. Of 172.16.0.10. Then you're going to set up your other computers, giving them that same name of SVR1, SVR2, and SVR3. And of course, also giving them static IP addresses. Before you do that, remember with your DNS, you want to configure reverse lookup. You also want to install DHCP and configure your scope, the datum scope, so that you can hand out IP addresses as needed. Once you're done with that, you're going to join the member servers. To the domain. And then finally, you're going to install Certification Authority on, wow, I'm having some trouble spelling. Lun DC1 and then configure. All in our instructions. Just go through all those things and you'll be in great shape.